Quick disclaimer up front, folks. I'm not a pilot, don't profess to be, no prima donna here, but I have been around, like many of you out there, DCS World and all the various flight simulations that have been afforded to us over the years, well, for many years. For me, about 20 plus years, and DCS World is amongst that, amongst MS 2004 and FSX and FSX Steam Edition and that wonderful Dovetail that got released, and you name it, MSFS 2020. It's all wonderful stuff, and we're in the perfect age of flight simulation. The hardware just lends itself to it so well, and DCS World is without doubt the best that there is out there when it comes to study sim, and this particular model is no different in my view. This is the Gazelle, or the SA342 by Polychop, and is a fantastic little helicopter. This particular livery is available for you on DCS forums. I've put it up there on the DCS user files. You can download it. This particular livery is a real life livery dedicated to a friend of mine who will be referred to as Golf Echo, purely because he's still active in service in the Army Air Corps, and this particular livery is a livery that he once flew. He spent many years flying Gazelles, and I know he's going to chuckle when he watches my pathetic attempt at trying to fly this during this five episode video series. I do have some link to the livery though, and that was I was in the British Army for 26 years, retired about 6.5 years ago, so I do have some experience when it comes to military matters, being in the infantry all that time, and so when it comes to appropriate missions etc. for the Wing Flex channels, I'll give you some military input to that where it's appropriate and applicable. Right, let's jump into the cockpit. Right, well, here we are in the cockpit, and the first thing that comes to mind is just how much we can see in here. The Gazelle cockpit is mainly glass, and as I said in the introduction video, you know, this is not going to go headlong into battle. It only takes one round to go through this perspex, I suppose it is, all glass. Yeah, so, you know, but that is of course a great strength of the Gazelle in the reconnaissance role, is just how much you can see. Let's shut the doors. And let's crack on. The first thing we're going to do, of course, is we're going to, we're going to say hello to Golf Echo. How are you doing? Oh, he doesn't look too impressed, does he? No, he's not. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check that everything is off, essentially. In the real world, the pilots are, you know, very strict about this, making sure that there's nothing on, etc., so that when they do actually start to fire it up, it's not going to drain power before the power on the bus is generated. In DCS World, you can pretty much, if you've coming into a cold aircraft like this, then you can pretty much guarantee that all the switches are in the right place. Anything I'd say is probably flick that to off on the Drax RWR system there. But apart from that, you know, we'll just do a cursory check. All good, everything is off, etc., and we're all happy about that. Before we start, I'm going to take, it's an assumption that you've got a rough idea what you're looking at here, but as we go through our various checks, etc., I'll just point out what that particular dial is or what it does. What we're not going to be doing is covering in this series is intimately the radio stack, the upper pilot area there and the co-pilot area here. We're not going to be covering the NADA communication system, the VHF radios, FM radios. We will cover ADF, which is just down there, quite difficult to see. We'll cover ADF in the flight video, which is part 2. But apart from that, there's some fantastic videos out there, and I point you to Cap at Grim Reapers, who pretty much covers these fairly well, so no point me covering them. Of course, the weapons panel here and the weapons system, of course, we've got the HOTS mounted, the HOT 3s. We'll, of course, cover those in the appropriate video. Right, let's crack on. First thing we'll do is we're going to stick our battery on, and as soon as we've put our battery on, we're going to put our nav lights on, so at least people know that, you know, we're in the aircraft and we're starting up. That makes it sound like there's people wandering around, doesn't it? But actually, in DCS terms or in player terms, on a multiplayer server, you know, it's just good practice, I think. Okay, so once we've done that, next thing we're going to do is we're going to fire up our alternator and our generator switch here, and then we're going to come down to this chrono and we're going to start the timer. Fuel pump on for about 20 seconds. Watching a couple of videos out there in the real world, they'll do it for about 15 to 20 seconds, but we'll put it at 20 seconds, and then we're going to start the starter, and the starter will start the turbine, which we'll be looking at this dial here. There we go. See how strict that was. Exactly 20 seconds. You'll notice the T4 temperature rise up to 600 or 550 there. Incidentally, watching a couple of Gazelle videos, pilots were saying that they watch this very closely, and if it goes well past the max here, then they'll vent and then they'll switch it off essentially. Okay, so that's our turbine. Our turbine has now equalised there, and is at 25,100, and that is where. And we can stop our chrono now, but 25,100, that is nice and idle for the turbine. And the whole point now is what we need to do is we need to get our rotors up to that particular point there. First thing we're going to do is we're going to release the rotor brake, because if we don't release the rotor brake and we start to introduce fuel, then the fuel lever here won't actually go forward because the rotor brake is on. So we need to make sure that we put the rotor brake up there. Incidentally, when you're startering up the turbine, if you just click the rotor brake, it will slowly move itself forward as it's doing there. But let's consider that's been done. Okay, so now we need to start our rotors up. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the fuel lever off of the first notch, and that's going to put the turbine up to, as it says there, up to about 29,000. And our rotors should start turning. We just might introduce a little bit more fuel. There we go. Rotors are now starting to move. You'll notice on the warning panel that certain lights are going to extinguish. RPM light will go out. RPM light? No, not the RPM light. Oh crikey! We're going to be looking at some engine. Yeah, there we go. RPM. I think that's when it's above about 180, I believe. RPM. The rotors. Then the RPM light will go out. Some other lights are going to be disappearing here, and that's when appropriate pressures are equalised or at normal pressures for the turbine oil and the engine oil. So here we are now. We've got the turbine, and alongside that, underneath it, is the engine. Outside is in thousands, so we're at 29,000 at the minute, turbine, and the rotors are at about 250, 260, something like that. And the normal idle for the rotors is 387 according to the manual. And all we need to do now is start to induce some fuel. So we can either do this manually by clicking on here and dragging, but of course we need to make sure that we keep a close eye on this dial here. We don't want the turbine to go faster than the rotors too much. We want to keep them equalized and synchronized. So we're just going to tap on the page up key, which is the default on the keyboard, and you can see there that we're increasing the turbine a lot easier than we are, of course, with the rotors. Clearly with resistance and so on, basic physics, right? Basic aerodynamics, isn't it? And we're going to do this all the way to maximum. We're at maximum now. So the rotors are going around at 387 RPM. It's not very fast, but 387 RPM, and as you can see there, 43,000, 43,500, something like that. That's where the turbine is. So the turbine and the rotors are now linked together. It's synchronized essentially, and that is that's good news. That's exactly what we want. Looking up our warning panel, we can see we've only got 2 warnings left: pitot heat and of course our autopilot. And what we're going to do now is set up the rest of the aircraft. So we're now generating the right amount of power through the system, so we can whack on our Drax RWR. I think that's powered via the 115 volt, not sure. And we're going to start over here on the left hand side with our gyro. We're just going to simply turn that to the GM point, the gyro, for the autopilot. It takes about a minute for these flags to disappear, and then it should say on, so we'll come back and look at that. We've got our lights on here. This is the main light panel. We'll turn our lights on for our cockpit. This cockpit is an English cockpit, which is a mod, so the lighting is slightly different there. And these control your console and panel lights. Coming down to the bottom here, we don't need our wipers on. Pitot switch will go on, the warning will disappear on the warning panel. The pitot, as just in case you don't know, is literally a tube that allows air to come in. That air creates pressure inside the tube, is then measured. That measurements is then calibrated to specific analog gauges, and essentially that's how we get our analog readings on these gauges. The pitot heat there prevents that from icing up or freezing up. In aircraft at high altitudes, clearly that's because of the environment, but down here it's unlikely it's going to freeze up due to that, but we could be flying in cold weather, so this just keeps it warm essentially. Hydraulics is not simulated in this model. Master arm will leave off. We're on the ground. It's good practice to do that. We don't want things going off. Our trim here is for the actuator, which allows us to fine-tune the trim. Essentially, our main function for trimming. Coming down to the bottom, this set of switches here, this is quite an interesting switch, the fuel tank switch. Here is our fuel quantity dial up here. Actually the fuel tank switch here allows us to transfer fuel from an auxiliary tank of 90 litres to the main tank of 437 litres, which gives us 527 litres in total. And this dial here that you can see that I've got the mouse on here, that represents 347 litres. And what we can do is we can transfer fuel from the auxiliary tank into the main tank in order to create a full tank and keep that full tank flying, so keep that full tank for us. And the way we do that is simply by pressing this switch here. Now, it takes about 15 minutes to transfer fuel from the auxiliary tank into the main tank, and when it's completed, the red light will come on, or the red light will come on if the tank is empty. The tank is empty in this case because I've started this up with 250 litres, so the auxiliary tank hasn't got anything in it. This convoy light here is this convoy switch is not modelled, and the sand filter, I believe, which is modelled externally, but I'm not sure if the light is working because when I put it on, there's no light there. But essentially, these are you know, you shouldn't worry too much about this. This, however, the magnetic brake is very, very important. It maintains the cyclic in the defined position, essentially, and you need that to be able to fly that in simulated mode. The alternator and generator regen switches are not modelled in this sim. Points to note: fuel pump stays on, and it stays on in the real world and stays on here, and there's no need to mess around with these switches once you've got it up and running. Final things to set up on the switches, so to speak, on the switch workflow. We're going to turn our autopilot on, and then we're going to turn our various dampers on for our free channels of pitch, roll and heading, and we're going to be making sure that we check these correction monitors as we did then as they come alive. Switch at the bottom here is quite important actually, and I recommend that you map that to your HOTAS, and this is for when we've trimmed to maintain an altitude or a speed. UV lights, always good to have them, especially at night, so pop that up, and as it gets darker, these dials and switches will light up and zoom up, etc. Voltage between 23 and 29 volts, so we're on 28 volts there, that's perfectly fine, and the engine temperature and T4 in all my about 20 plus hours flying this, I haven't seen those being affected by the environment, so I think they're just lightly modelled, because I'm not sure whether actually that is the T4 temperature as it raised there, whether that was realistic or not in speed wise, but nonetheless. Now, okay, now let's start uncaging some stuff on our dials. First of all, our VVI. In part 2, when we look at flying, this will become very, very important, this dial. In hundreds of metres, from 1 to 800 metres a minute of climb or dive, and like I said, that will be covered in part 2. Our main artificial horizon here, we right click on this, whoops, we left click on this to release. And once we've released it and we let go, we can then fine tune the horizon indicator there. About there is about right, that's perfectly fine. our caution light up there, which will come on if indeed we stress the engine too much. Our speedo here, we don't need to touch that. This is an important dial. This is our torque indicator. Again, it will be covered in video 2 or part 2 flights, but in my view, you might have different perception, but my view, I like to set it on about 90. That just gives me a visual reference. There's no alarm associated with it whatsoever, but it gives me a visual reference of where the torque needle is on the torque indicator. The source selection switch here, I like to have this on waypoint for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it helps me when it comes to hovering, because these longitudinal and latitudinal lines here, the white lines that you can see, represent pretty much the aircraft. And also when you're flying on a direction towards an ADF beacon, for example, plus or minus 3 degrees either side of the line of centre, this vertical line will help you along with our ADF indicator, which we'll cover in a minute. If you put it on ADF, it's very, very sensitive, and what I found is you end up chasing an error. So waypoint is good enough. The ADF indicator here that we can see right now on this particular setup, we're not going to be messing around with this, but in part 2 we will do. I'll do a video where we set up an ADF, so at least you've got some basic navigation from this video series. But as I said, I'll direct you towards Grim Reapers. Our radar altitude, let's uncage that. So we just simply scroll with the mouse wheel, and this is an alarm indicator when we set our flag. I'm going to set it to 50. This is in meters. So 50 meters, about 160 plus feet, and the altitude barometer here, the radar barometer here, radar altimeter goes up to about 575 meters. That's quite a lot. It's about 1,800 feet. So you know, probably no need anything more than about 50. Up at the top here is our barometric altitude meter, currently at 1013 for hectopascals. No need for it. There's no translation to millibars, which if I remember rightly, 1013 is about 2992, something like that. Yeah, we've all heard that a lot before, haven't we? And the last thing to set up really is our standby attitude indicator. We just simply left click on it, and at the same time scroll our mouse wheel to align where we want our horizontal bars. Okay, we can set up a couple of other things now. For example, we can now just turn our countermeasures on, and we can set that up how we want, etc. And of course our radios and our navigation. As I said, purposely I'm not doing this solely so that I'm not repeating what has been done so many times and much better than I could. And I point you to Grim Reaper's excellent video on the NADIS system there. Right, let's have a quick check. First of all, there's our on for our gyro. We said that. We've got nothing on the master warning, and our Drax RWR has come on. What didn't we do? I'll tell you what we didn't do, and that is we didn't do any form of light test or testing at the beginning, which of course would have been good practice when we turn the battery on. So so that we can say we've done it, let's do a quick test of that now. Good, there they all are. We know they're going to come on if there's going to be a problem. And likewise with the test here. And I didn't actually cover the start and idle lights there, which will go off when the turbine and the engine have synchronized. Those lights will go off. But for what you need to know, that's pretty much it. The aircraft is now ready to go. Oh, and one other final important thing, of course, the collective. Make sure that that's down at the very bottom, and that you do a basic controls check before you start flying it. And always good practice, you can see in the bottom left hand side there, pop up that control indicator with right control and enter, and that way you know then that your HOTAS isn't isn't off centered or anything like that. So good to do that before you even start any of what we've done there. Right, let's ask Golf Echo. Is that a pass? Golf? What do you think? Was that all right? He's not even looking at me. He's so shocked. Oh dear. Right, okay, there we go. So that's how you set up or how you start up the SA342 Gazelle. Join me in video 2, part 2, where we look at some basic flight. Cheers and take care. Bye bye.